Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when the porch light was the only signal you needed, when supper started at the same hour every evening, and when the whole family somehow fit around one television set that took a full minute to warm up. We are drifting back into 1970s America, into the wood paneling and the shag carpet, the smell of percolator coffee moving down the hall, the sound of a screen door slapping shut behind a kid who is already halfway across the yard. Before we settle in, I want to say a real thank you to the viewer who suggested this one. You wrote in asking what family life actually felt like back then, and how much of it has quietly slipped away, and the moment I read it, I knew we had to make it. So many of these videos come straight from you, from your memories, your questions, the little things you remember that I never would have thought of on my own. It shapes everything we make here, and it is a big part of how this little channel keeps growing. So if you are enjoying these, feel free to like the video, subscribe if you have not yet, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. And if you would rather drift off with these somewhere other than here, we are now on Spotify too. The link is down in the description, no pressure, just there if you want it. Now go ahead and get comfortable, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft steady hush in the background, pull the blanket up, find the cool side of the pillow, and let your shoulders come down from around your ears. Because I want you to wonder, just for a little while, what a family evening really felt like in 1974. What did a Sunday afternoon sound like when nobody had anywhere else to be? What did the kitchen smell like at 5 o'clock, with something simmering on the stove and the radio playing low? How did it feel to be a kid told simply to be home when the streetlights came on, with no phone in your pocket and no way to be reached? What did families actually talk about at the dinner table, before screens sat down at every place setting? And where did all of it go? So let the day loosen its grip. Let the room go soft and quiet around you. And just like that, it is 1974. The porch light is on. Somewhere down the block, a screen door bangs shut. Supper is nearly ready, and the whole evening is still ahead of you. Let's start with the morning. Before the coffee percolator finishes its slow gurgling climb, the house is already stirring, a father shuffling toward the bathroom, a mother pulling a robe tight against the early chill, a child rubbing sleep from their eyes at the top of the carpeted stairs. There is no glowing screen to check, no notifications waiting to be cleared. There is only the smell of toast beginning to brown, the clink of a spoon against a cereal bowl, and the low murmur of the morning radio giving the weather. Everyone rises into the same small kitchen, into the same handful of minutes, and for a little while the whole family shares one warm, ordinary beginning. It is the kind of togetherness that happened without anyone planning it, and it is harder to find now. The kitchen at this hour has a particular light to it, pale and grey at the window, softening as the sun climbs over the neighbour's roofline. The linoleum is cool under bare feet, and the radiator ticks somewhere down the hall, working to catch up with the morning. Your mother stands at the counter in her robe, her hair still set from the night before, moving through the small motion she could do in her sleep, and probably nearly is. The bread drops into the toaster. The butter softens on its little dish. The percolator burbles on the stove, that steady, patient sound rising and falling, and the smell of the coffee reaches every corner of the house before a single cup is poured. You come down the stairs slow, one hand on the banister, still half inside a dream. Your father is already at the table, the newspaper folded into quarters beside his plate, reading the same page he reads every morning while his coffee goes from too hot to just right. He does not look up right away, but he knows you are there, and he says something small. about the weather, about the day ahead, and you answer with a mumble that means nothing and everything at once. This is how the morning talks to itself, in half sentences, in the language of people who have shared a house long enough not to need whole ones. There is a rhythm to it that nobody wrote down. The bathroom door opening and closing, the scrape of a chair, the refrigerator door with its heavy sucking pull, and the cold breath of it against your legs as you reach for the milk. Someone always needs the milk. Someone always leaves the cabinet open. Your mother closes it without a word, the way she closes 100 small things every day and sets a bowl in front of you and tells you to eat before it gets soggy. The cereal box stands tall on the table like a little cardboard billboard, and you read the back of it while you eat, the same words you read yesterday and will read tomorrow, because there is nothing else to look at and nothing else you would rather be doing. The spoon clinks against the bowl. The milk goes sweet at the bottom. Outside the window, a bird works at something in the yard, and a car starts somewhere down the block, and the whole neighbourhood is waking into the same weekday morning at more or less the same time. It strikes you now, looking back, how much of that morning happened in one room. There was nowhere else to be. No one wandered off to a corner with a screen glowing in their lap. No one sat at the same table living in some other faraway place. You were all simply there, in the kitchen, in the coffee smell and the toast smell, close enough to pass the sugar without asking. The togetherness was not the point of it. The togetherness was just the shape the morning took, because there was only the one kitchen and the one radio and the one small window of time before everyone scattered into the day. Your father finishes his coffee and stands, and the morning tilts toward its ending. He gathers his keys from the little dish by the door, pats his pockets for the things he always forgets, and there is a flurry now. Lunch is handed over, a hat located, a reminder called out about something happening after school. Your mother straightens a collar. Somebody cannot find a shoe. The screen door opens and lets in a wedge of cool outside air, and then it slaps shut again, and the house begins to empty out toward the world. And then, for a moment, it is quiet. The dishes sit in the sink. The radio plays on to no one in particular. The last of the coffee smell hangs in the air, growing faint. Your mother stands at the window with her own cup finally in hand, watching the street, and the kitchen holds the warmth of everyone who just passed through it, the way a room does after the people have gone. That is the thing you miss, maybe, more than the toast or the radio or the particular grey light. It is the way a whole family used to pour itself into a single small morning, without meaning to, without knowing it was anything worth remembering. Mornings come faster and quieter now, scattered across separate rooms and separate screens, each of us waking into our own private world. But back then you woke into a shared one, warm and crowded and ordinary, and it is worth sitting with, just for a breath, before the day carries you off. Now step into the living room. There it sits, heavy and wood-framed, the single television set the entire family gathers around. It takes a moment to warm up when you turn the dial, the picture blooming slowly out of a bright dot in the centre of the screen. There is no arguing about it in separate rooms, no everyone drifting off to their own glowing rectangle. Whatever is on, you watch it together, the news, the variety show, the movie that airs once and may not come again for a year. And when something wonderful happens on that screen, you all feel it at the same moment, in the same room, shoulder to shoulder on the couch. The set is a piece of furniture as much as a machine. a great wooden cabinet that sits low against the wall like it plans to stay there for a generation, which it does. The top of it is a shelf in its own right, home to a doily, a lamp, a framed photograph, a small ceramic, something your mother brought back from a trip. The screen itself is round at the corners and modest in size, and it glows a soft, grainy grey-white. When it finally comes to life, the sound arriving a beat before the picture, a low hum, and then the voices swimming up out of the static. You know its habits the way you know a family member. You know the dial that clicks stiffly from channel to channel, all the way around and back again, and how few of those channels actually carry anything. You know the fine-tuning knob you nudge when the picture rolls or waves. You know that when the reception goes soft, someone has to get up and adjust the antenna on top. The two silver rods you bend and angle like you're trying to catch something out of the air, which, in a way, you are. And you know that the person adjusting it has to stand just so, one arm raised, holding the picture steady with their own body while everyone else calls out whether it is better or worse. There is only the one, and that changes everything. Because there is only the one, watching television is not a thing you do alone. It is a thing the family does, gathered on the couch and the armchair and the floor, deciding together, more or less, what the evening will hold. Somebody has an opinion. Somebody gives way. Your father usually gets the last word on the news, and after that the choices loosen, and the whole room settles into whatever comes next. You watch what is on because what is on is what there is, and there is a strange freedom in that, the freedom of not having to choose from 10,000 things. The programs come once and then they are gone. A movie airs on a certain night at a certain hour, and if you miss it, you miss it. Maybe for a year, maybe forever. So you plan around it. You finish your homework early. You get your bath out of the way. You gather in the living room before it starts, everyone in their usual spot, and there is a small thrill of anticipation. As the picture warms and the opening music begins, you cannot pause it, you cannot rewind. You have to be there, present, all of you at once, or the moment passes you by. And because you are all there, you feel it together. A funny line lands, and the whole room laughs at the same instant, the sound of it filling the small space. Something frightening happens, and you feel the couch go tense on either side of you, everyone leaning in. Something tender, and nobody says a word, and you can sense the quiet settle over the family like a held breath. You're not just watching the same show, you're having the same feeling, in the same room, at the same time, and passing it silently back and forth between you. The commercials came too, and even those you shared. The jingles everyone knew, the ones your little brother sang under his breath for days. During the break, somebody got up for a snack or the bathroom, or to answer the phone on the wall, and the conversation picked up in the gaps, and then hushed again when the program returned. It was a whole evening's rhythm, this gathering around the one warm screen, and it happened night after night, without anyone thinking of it as anything special. It is a different thing now, of course. There is a screen in every hand and a screen in every room, and each of us can watch anything, anywhere, at any hour we please. Alone, we have gained the whole world at the touch of a button and lost, somewhere in the gaining, the couch full of people all watching the one thing together. There is no waiting for it anymore, no missing it, no needing to be in the same place at the same time, and so there is less of that shared held breath, less of that laughter arriving all at once from every corner of the room. But back then, the family had only the one television, and so the family watched as one. And when the picture finally faded to that small bright dot and vanished, You all rose together in the dim, blinking room, carried by the same story into the same quiet night. It is worth remembering that closeness we did not know we had. It is nearly 5 o'clock now, and something is simmering on the stove. In 1970s America, supper was not a thing you grabbed on the way to somewhere else. It happened at the same hour, in the same place, with the same faces around the table. The table gets set, forks on the left, napkins folded, a pitcher of milk sweating in the centre, and everyone is expected to be there, hands washed, chairs pulled in. There is no television murmuring in the background, no phone face up beside the plate, just the passing of dishes, the small talk of the day, and the simple, steady ritual of a family eating together every single night. The smell of it has been building for an hour, drifting out of the kitchen and down the hall and up the stairs, so that by the time you're called, you already know what is coming. Something in a pot, something in the oven, the particular Tuesday smell that means one thing, the Friday smell that means another. Your mother has been at it since she got the potatoes going, moving between the stove and the counter and the sink in a wide, unhurried loop, lifting lids, stirring, tasting from the wooden spoon and reaching for the salt. The table is where the day gathers itself. It is the same table where the homework gets done and the bills get paid and the coffee gets drunk. But at 5 o'clock it becomes something else. Dressed for the meal. The everyday plates set out, the glasses filled. Somebody is sent to set it, and there is a right way. Forks here, knives there, the folded napkin, and you do it half from memory and half from the small corrections called out from the kitchen. The milk comes out in its pitcher and beads with cold in the warm room. The butter waits on its dish. And then the call goes up, supper, and the house answers it. Your father folds his newspaper. Your brother thunders down the stairs. Hands are inspected and sent back to be washed again. Chairs scrape in toward the table, each of you in your usual place, the places nobody assigned but everybody keeps. The food comes to the centre in its serving bowl, still steaming, and the passing begins, the dishes moving hand to hand around the table, heavier one way than the other, everyone taking their share. What strikes you, remembering it, is how ordinary it all was, and how faithfully it repeated. This was not a special dinner. There was no occasion. It was simply Wednesday, and then it was Thursday, and the supper happened all the same, at the same hour, with the same people, because that was what a family did. You did not have to be reminded. You did not have to be gathered from far-flung corners. Everyone knew that when the light started to slant and the smell filled the house, it was nearly time, and you made your way home. The talk at the table was small, and it was everything. How the day went, what happened at school, something your father heard, something your mother needed you to do. There were no screens to hide behind, no glowing rectangle to pull your eyes down and away. There was only the food and the faces and the loose, wandering conversation of people who saw one another every single day and still found things to say. Sometimes it was lively, sometimes it was quiet, just the clink of forks and the passing of the bread. Either way, you were there, together, present in the same small circle of light. There were rules to it, unspoken mostly. You did not start until everyone was served. You did not leave until you were excused. You ate what was put in front of you, or you tried, and complaints were met with a look that ended the matter. Elbows off the table, napkin in the lap. These were not grand lessons, but they were lessons, taught a little each night over the mashed potatoes, the manners of a person who lives among other people and owes them something. And when the meal wound down, it did not simply end. The plates were cleared, carried to the sink in a small procession, and there was the after part too, the dishes washed and dried and put away, one person at the sink and one with the towel, the last of the day's talk happening over the running water. The kitchen was set right again. The table was wiped down and left bare, waiting for the homework and the morning coffee and the next evening supper, which would come at the same hour in the same place, with the same faces the day after that. We eat differently now, and mostly we know it. Supper comes when it can, grabbed between the things that fill the evening, eaten in shifts, in front of screens, in the car, on the way. The table sits empty more nights than not. There is nothing wrong with any single one of those meals, and yet added up something has thinned out. The steady nightly gathering that once held a family together without anyone noticing the work it did. But in the 1970s, supper waited for no one, and yet somehow always had you, all of you, in your chairs by 5 o'clock. And it is a lovely thing to sit with, that image of the lit table and the past dishes and the ordinary night. Let it linger a moment before it fades. Let's go outside now, into the long light of a summer afternoon. The rule was simple, and every child knew it by heart. Be home when the streetlights come on. Until then, the neighbourhood belonged to you. The sidewalks, the empty lots, the creek at the end of the road, the backyards you cut through without asking. No one carried a phone. No one could reach you, and somehow that was fine. Your mother did not know your exact location for hours at a stretch, and you did not think it strange, because the whole world felt like it was watching out for you. The morning began indoors, but by the middle of the day the house could not hold you, and you were out the back door and gone, the screen slapping shut behind you, into a world that stretched as far as your legs could carry you. There was no plan. There was rarely even a destination. There was just the neighbourhood, wide and open and full of other children who had also been let loose, all of you converging in the street or the park or somebody's yard by some instinct nobody had to explain. You knew every inch of it. You knew which fences could be climbed and which yards had a dog. You knew the shortcut through the Henderson's hedge and the good tree at the end of the block and the storm drain where the water ran after a rain. You knew the creek, cold and shallow, where you turned over rocks and got your sneakers soaked and did not care. The territory was yours, mapped not on any paper but in your own 2 feet, and you travelled it all day long, from one adventure to the next, inventing them as you went. Nobody was keeping track of you. This is the part that seems almost impossible now looking back. For hours at a stretch, your mother did not know where you were. Not the street, not the yard, not the general direction. You had simply gone out, and you would simply come back, and in between you were somewhere in the wide green world doing the things children do. There was no way to reach you. There was no phone in your pocket, no way for anyone to check in or call you home early or find you if they needed to, and astonishingly this worried no one. It worked because the whole neighbourhood was watching, in its loose and casual way. Every mother on the block knew every child on the block, and if you were doing something you should not, word had a way of getting home before you did. You could knock on any door for a drink of water or a bandage or to use the bathroom. If you fell and skinned your knee 3 streets over, some other family's mother would clean it and send you on your way. The adults formed a kind of net, invisible and unspoken, spread across the whole neighbourhood, so that a child could roam freely and still, somehow, be held. The games went on for hours, the long sprawling games of summer that started with a handful of kids and grew as more wandered up. Somebody had a ball, somebody knew a game. You chose sides in the fair, elaborate way children have, and played until the argument, and settled the argument, and played some more. When you got hot, you found the shade. When you got thirsty, you drank from a hose. The afternoon had no clock in it, no schedule, no adult calling the next thing. It was just yours. All of it. Open and unstructured and endless. And the only rule, the one rule that governed all of it, was the streetlights. Be home when they come on. It was a beautiful rule, really, because it needed no watch. You simply had to notice, as the afternoon deepened into evening, and the light went from white to gold to blue, the moment the lamps buzzed to life up and down the block, that was the signal. That was the day telling you it was over. And all across the neighbourhood, at that same soft signal, children turned for home, drifting out of the yards and off the sidewalks toward their own lit kitchens and their own waiting suppers. There was a particular feeling in that walk home, tired in the good way, grass-stained, sunburned, the streetlight glow just beginning overhead, and the smell of somebody's dinner on the air. You had been out in the world all day, unwatched and unreachable, and you were coming back in, and both of those things felt exactly right. The freedom and the return were two halves of the same whole, and a child needed both. We hold on tighter now, and there are reasons for it, and it is not for me to say they are wrong. But something was lost when the roaming ended, when every child became reachable at every moment, and the wide unwatched afternoons gave way to scheduled ones. The neighbourhood is quieter now in the golden hour. The streetlights come on to empty yards, but once, not so long ago, those lights were a call that a whole generation answered, drifting home through the dusk from adventures no grown-up ever knew about. And it is worth remembering that particular freedom before we let it go. Now look at the wall by the kitchen doorway where the telephone hangs. It has a cord long enough to stretch around the corner if you needed a little privacy, and a rotary dial that took its slow, clicking time with every number. There was only the one, shared by everyone in the house. If your sister was on it, you waited. If a call came during supper, it could wait too. And when it rang, you never knew who was on the other end until you picked it up and said hello, a small mystery, every single time. It was a solid thing, that telephone heavier than you would expect. The receiver a satisfying weight in your hand. It came in a colour chosen to match the kitchen, harvest gold, maybe, or an avocado green, or a creamy off-white gone slightly yellow with age and cooking grease. It hung on the wall where everyone could reach it and no one could hide it, right there in the busiest room of the house, so that every call was, in a sense, a public event. The dial was the heart of it. You put your finger in the little hole over the number you wanted and pulled it round to the metal stop, and then you let go, and it clicked its slow way back before you could dial the next one. A long number took real patience. If you were calling a friend whose number ended in a 9 or a 0, you felt every second of that long return. And if your finger slipped or you lost your place, there was nothing to do but hang up and start the whole thing over, all 7 numbers from the top. There was only one, and that one fact shaped so much. The telephone was not yours. It belonged to the house, to everyone, and so using it meant taking your turn. If your older sister was on it, wound up in the cord in the corner, talking low to a friend she'd just seen an hour ago at school, you waited, you hovered, you made pointed sighs, and she waved you off and kept talking, because possession was everything, and she'd gotten there first. When you finally got your turn, you understood, and you held on to it just the same. The cord did its best to give you a little room. It was long and coiled, and you could stretch it, pull it taut around the doorframe, into the hall, as far as it would go, trying to carve out some small pocket of privacy in a house where privacy was scarce. But it only reached so far. There was always someone in the kitchen, doing dishes, getting a snack, pretending not to listen. Your calls were half heard by the whole family, and you learned to speak in a kind of code, or to wait until the room emptied, or simply to accept that your business was, more or less, everyone's business. And when it rang, that was the mystery of it. The bell went off, loud and insistent, cutting through whatever the house was doing, and everyone froze for half a second before somebody moved to answer it. You did not know who it was. There was no name lit up, no way to see who was calling before you decided whether to pick up. You simply lifted the receiver and said hello into the unknown, and on the other end could be anyone, a grandmother, a friend, a wrong number, news good or bad. Every ring was a little door you opened without knowing what stood behind it. There were rules to the telephone too, the manners of the household. You did not call people too late in the evening or too early in the morning. You did not tie up the line for hours, because someone might be trying to reach the house. During supper, the phone could ring, and it went unanswered, because supper was supper, and whoever it was would call back. The telephone served the family and not the other way around, and a call was something you fit into the life of the house, not something that interrupted it whenever it pleased. Because there was only the one and it hung in the kitchen, you could not carry your calls off into your own private world. You could not text silently from across the room. Every connection to the outside came through that one spot on the wall in the middle of everyone, and so the family knew, more or less, who was calling and why. It kept things woven together in a way that is hard to describe. The phone was a shared thing, a shared responsibility, a shared small drama, and it lived at the very centre of the home. Now the telephone has left the wall entirely and gone into our pockets, one for each of us, silent and private and endlessly capable. We know who is calling before we answer. We rarely call at all. And there's so much we have gained, the whole world a tap away, that it feels almost ungrateful to name what slipped off with the cord. But that mystery is one of the things, the small wonder of a ringing bell and an unknown voice, the turn-taking, the cord stretched around the doorframe, the whole family within earshot. It hung there on the kitchen wall and it held us together, and it is worth remembering fondly before we hang it up for good. It is Sunday afternoon now, and there is nowhere in particular to be. So your father jingles the keys and the whole family piles into the car, and you go for a drive, not to a destination, just for the going. The windows come down. The radio plays low. You watch the town slide past. Then the edge of town. Then the open road where the fields open up on either side. No one is tracking the miles or the time. The drive is the whole point, an unhurried hour of being together while the countryside rolls by. The car itself was a member of the family, big and heavy and familiar, with a wide bench seat in front and another in back, room enough for everyone with a little arguing over who sat where. It had its own smell, warm vinyl and a trace of gasoline and whatever your father kept in the glove box, and its own sounds. The door that shut with a heavy thunk, the engine that turned over with a cough and then settled into a steady rumble you felt through the seat. You knew that car. You had spent 100 Sundays in it. There was no plan, and that was the beauty of the thing. Nobody had somewhere to be. The chores were done, the big meal was eaten or waiting, the long slow afternoon stretched out empty and yours. And so your father, restless in the good way, would reach for the keys and say something about going for a drive, and that was all it took. You piled in, the whole family, and backed out of the driveway and turned onto the street with no idea where you were headed, because headed nowhere was exactly the point. The windows came down and the afternoon poured in. The air moved through the car, warm and full of the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt, and once you got past the edge of things, the green smell of the fields. Your mother's hair lifted and turned in the wind, and she held it down with one hand. In the back seat you leaned your head against the frame and let the wind push at your face, watching the world scroll past the glass, the houses giving way to the last gas station, and then the road opening up into country. The radio played low under it all, a song and then a voice and then another song, whatever the station offered, nobody changing it much. Sometimes your parents talked, low in the front seat, about grown-up things you only half heard. Sometimes nobody said anything at all, and the silence was easy, filled by the wind and the radio and the hum of the tyres. You watched a barn go by, a pond, a cow standing in a field, indifferent to you. There was nothing to look at and everything to look at, and the afternoon simply unspooled. Nobody was counting the miles. This is what feels almost foreign now, remembering it. There was no destination punched into anything, no arrival time, no route chosen for speed. You did not know how far you would go or when you would turn around. Your father drove by feel, taking a road because it looked pretty, turning off because he wondered where it went, and the not knowing was part of the pleasure. The drive did not have to lead anywhere to be worth taking. The going was the whole of it. And in that aimless hour, something happened to the family. Sealed together in that rolling metal room with nowhere to be and nothing to do but watch the country pass, you fell into a particular kind of closeness. Nobody could wander off. Nobody could disappear into another room. You were all there, side by side, sharing the same view out the same windows, and the talk that came, when it came easy, the way talk does when people are pointed the same direction and in no hurry to get anywhere. Sometimes the drive had a small event in it, a stop for ice cream at a stand your father knew, a pause at an overlook to stretch your legs and take in the view. Sometimes it was just the drive, out and back, an hour or two of moving through the world together before the lights started to go and your father, without a word, turned the car back toward home. And you returned the way you left, windows down, radio low, a little sun-warmed and drowsy, the town rising up again around you. We do not drive that way anymore, most of us. The car is for getting somewhere, and getting there fast, the route chosen for us, the miles counted down, each of us in our own seat with our own screen, the windows up and the world sealed out. The drive has become the dull part, the space between the places that matter. And a Sunday spent driving nowhere at all would strike us now as a waste, or at least a puzzle. But once, driving nowhere was one of the finest things a family could do with an afternoon. No destination, no clock. Just the open windows and the low radio and the country rolling by, and everyone together for the length of the road. It is worth holding on to that gentle, aimless hour before we forget it was ever ours. Let's talk about the neighbours. In the 1970s, the people next door were not strangers you nodded to from the driveway. They were part of the daily fabric of your life. They came to the back door, not the front, and they rarely knocked. A cup of sugar borrowed, a casserole dropped off, a folding chair pulled up on the porch as the evening cooled. It all happened without invitation or ceremony. You knew their children, their dogs, the sound of their screen door. The street was less a row of separate houses than one long shared front room. The front door in those days was almost formal, reserved for guests and salesmen and the occasional important visit. The real traffic of the neighbourhood moved through the back. That was where the neighbours came, across the yard, up the steps, right to the kitchen door, because they were not company. They were neighbours, and a neighbour did not need to be received. A neighbour let themselves into the orbit of your day as easily as they crossed the grass, and you did the same in return, back and forth across the property line that nobody much regarded. The knock, when there was one, was more of a courtesy than a request, a soft rap on the frame as they were already leaning in, calling out a name, letting the screen door swing. Half the time there was no knock at all, just a voice at the door and a face at the screen, asking if you had a moment or an egg or an opinion. You did not straighten the house first. You did not need warning. The kitchen was always more or less ready for a neighbour because a neighbour was always more or less expected, if not today then tomorrow. And the things that passed between houses, small and constant, wove the whole street together. A cup of sugar, borrowed mid-recipe, returned later in kind. A casserole carried over when someone was sick or grieving or had just brought a baby home. Set on the counter still warm, the dish to be returned whenever. A tool lent across the fence, a ladder, a recipe copied out by hand. Nobody kept a ledger of it. It all evened out over the years, the endless small exchange of a community that took care of itself as a matter of course. You knew them, truly knew them, the way you know people you see every single day. You knew their children by name and by nature, which ones were trouble and which ones were sweet, and they knew yours the same way. You knew their dogs, and the dogs knew you and cut across their yard without a second thought. You knew the particular slap of their screen door, so familiar you could tell it from your own. You knew the sounds of their evenings coming over the fence, the mother calling the kids in, the father's car in the driveway, the radio through the open window. The evenings especially belonged to the neighbours. When the day's heat broke and supper was done, people came out onto their porches and their steps, drawn by the cooling air and by one another. Somebody pulled a folding chair up, somebody wandered over, and soon there was a loose little gathering in the dusk, the grown-ups talking low over the sound of the crickets, the kids catching the last of the light in the yard, everyone in no hurry to go in. It was not planned, it simply happened, night after warm night, because that was what the street did. The porch was the hinge of it all, the halfway place between the private house and the public street. Sitting out on the porch, you were home and you were also available, part of the life of the block. A neighbour passing by would stop and lean on the rail. A conversation would start and stretch out long, and the porches faced one another across the street and down the row, so that the whole neighbourhood was, on a summer evening, a kind of single open room, everyone within calling distance, everyone loosely together. It made a person feel held, that closeness, though you would not have used the word. If you were struggling, someone noticed. If you needed help, it came, often before you asked. There was less privacy, certainly, less of the sealed-off, curtains-drawn independence we prize now. Everybody knew a little more of everybody's business than we might be comfortable with today. But in exchange you were never quite alone. The net of the neighbourhood was always there beneath you, made of nothing more than casseroles and borrowed sugar and folding chairs in the dusk. We live more separately now, and we chose it mostly, in 1,000 small preferences for privacy and space, and the freedom of not being known. We nod from the driveway. We may not know the names next door. The porches sit empty in the evenings, and the back doors stay shut, and the casseroles do not travel much anymore. There is comfort in that privacy, and I would not tell you it is wrong to want it. But there was a warmth in the old way, the neighbours who never knocked, the street that was one long shared front room. It asked a lot of a person, and it gave a lot back, and it is worth remembering gently, that closeness across the fences before it slips entirely out of living memory. Consider, for a moment, the paycheck. For a great many families in the 1970s, The whole household was built around a single income. One parent went out to work, and the money that came home had to stretch across the mortgage, the groceries, the car, the shoes that never stopped needing replacing. It was not always easy, and it was rarely luxurious. But there was a certain clarity to it. A budget kept in a checkbook, bills paid at the kitchen table, a life measured in what you actually had. Families made do, and mostly they made it work. The check came on a Friday, folded into an envelope, and it was a real and physical thing, cashed at the bank or the market, turned into the bills and coins that ran the household for another week. There was nothing abstract about the money. You could see it, count it, hold it in your hand, and when it was gone, it was gone. That kept everyone honest in a way. A family knew, week to week, more or less exactly where it stood, because the whole of it passed through the kitchen in an envelope you could open. The budget was a real document too, though it lived mostly in a checkbook and in your mother's head. She knew what was coming in and what had to go out, and she made the two meet with a skill that looked, to a child, like ordinary magic. So much for the mortgage, so much for the electric, so much set aside, if there was anything to set aside, in a jar or an account for the things that would come, the winter coats, the dentist, the car when it finally gave out. It was a tight arithmetic, done again every month, and it left little room for error. The bills were paid at the kitchen table, usually in the evening after supper, the whole grim, pleasant ritual of it. Your father, or your mother, or the two of them together, sat down with the stack of envelopes and the checkbook and a pen, and worked through them one at a time. There was the writing of the check, the tearing of the stub, the licking of the stamp, the careful entry in the ledger, and the running subtraction that told you what was left. You watched it sometimes from the edge of it, and understood dimly that this was the machinery of the family, the thing that kept the lights on and the food coming. It was not a wealthy life for most. There was rarely much extra. The vacations were modest or homemade. The clothes were bought to last and handed down. A treat was a treat because it did not come often, and a new thing was an event because most things were made to be kept and mended and used until they truly could not be used anymore. You did not have everything you wanted, and you knew it, and somehow that knowing was not the wound we might imagine. It was simply the shape of things, and you lived inside it. There was a clarity to that limit, hard as it could be. You knew what you had, and you knew what you did not, and you lived accordingly. There was no easy way to spend money you did not yet possess, no invisible line of credit smoothing over the gap between wanting and affording. If you could not pay for it, you did not buy it, and you waited, and you saved, and the waiting made the getting sweeter. A family measured its life in real terms, in the actual dollars in the actual account, and that gave the whole enterprise a kind of solid ground. The one income shaped the household in other ways too, of course, ways we rightly examine now with a more careful eye. It often meant one parent home and one parent out, roles narrower than the ones we live by today, expectations that pressed on people in real and sometimes unfair ways. It was not a simpler time in the sense of being an easier one, and the single paycheck could be a tightrope, one illness or layoff from disaster. Let us not pretend the arithmetic always worked, or that the strain of it did not fall hard on the people doing the sums. But within those limits, families built lives of real substance, and there was a dignity in the making do. Meals were stretched. Things were fixed rather than replaced. A dollar was respected because a dollar was hard-won and finite, and a child growing up in that house absorbed something about money, about patience, about the difference between what you want and what you can have, that has grown harder to teach in an age of easy everything. So consider that single paycheck and the whole careful household built around it. It was tight, and it was clear, and it asked a family to know exactly what it had and to live honestly within it. There was worry in it, and there was also a kind of grounding, and it is worth sitting with a moment, that plainer arithmetic of an ordinary life, before the day carries us on. Now step back into the kitchen, the true centre of the home. This is where the day began and where it ended, where homework got done and secrets got spilled and the telephone got answered. The counters were laminate, the appliances were avocado green or harvest gold, and something was almost always cooking. Your mother moved through this room like it was an extension of herself, and everyone else drifted in and out of it all day long. It was not the fanciest room in the house, but it was the one with the warmth, the one that pulled the whole family toward it. Every house has a room that holds it together, and in the 1970s that room was the kitchen, without question or competition. The living room was for guests and television. The bedrooms were for sleeping, but the kitchen was for living, and everything of consequence seemed to happen there, at the counter or the table or the spot by the phone, in the light that stayed on latest and the warmth that lingered longest. The look of it comes back easily. The counters were laminate, patterned in some cheerful busy print meant to hide the wear, worn smooth and pale in the spots that got the most use. The appliances wore their era's colours proudly, the deep avocado green, the warm harvest gold, the coppery tones that seemed so modern then and so unmistakable now. There was the big refrigerator that hummed and shuddered, the stove where everything happened, the little dinette set, the curtains at the window over the sink chosen to match, keeping the whole room in one warm key. And something was almost always cooking, or about to, or just finished. The kitchen held its smells the way other rooms hold furniture, the morning coffee giving way to the lunch to the long slow build of supper, the day measured out in what was on the stove. Even between meals the room carried a trace of it, the ghost of breakfast, the promise of dinner, so that walking into the kitchen at any hour meant walking into a place that smelled, faintly and always, of food and warmth and being cared for. Your mother was the centre of the centre, moving through that room like she'd grown out of the floor of it. She knew every drawer and every squeak, could reach for a thing without looking, could carry 3 tasks at once and a conversation besides. The kitchen bent itself around her habits, arranged over years to suit the way she worked, and when she was in it, cooking, cleaning, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee, the room was fully itself humming along the family's engine at work. But the kitchen was not hers alone. Everyone drifted through it all day long, drawn by hunger or habit, or the simple gravity of the place. Child came in for a snack and stayed to talk. Your father came in for coffee and lingered by the counter. People passed through on their way to somewhere and got caught, leaning in the doorway, sitting at the table, and the passing through became a conversation, became a whole afternoon. The kitchen collected people. It would not let them go quickly. Whatever you came in for, you tended to stay, and so it became the room where the real talk happened. Homework got done at the kitchen table, out in the open, close to help. The telephone hung on the kitchen wall so every call passed through it, and the harder conversations, the confessions and the worries, and the secrets that a child finally works up the nerve to share. Those happened in the kitchen too, most often, standing at the counter while your mother cooked, her back half turned, which somehow made it easier to say the difficult thing. Something about that room, warm and busy and lived in, loosened people's tongues. It was never the finest room in the house. The good furniture was elsewhere. The company was received elsewhere. But the kitchen had something the other rooms did not. A warmth that was more than the heat of the stove. The accumulated warmth of a family's whole life lived in one place. It was worn and it was ordinary and it was the true heart of everything, and everyone knew it without saying it. The way you know your own home. We build our houses differently now, and even when the kitchen is grand, it is not always the heart the way it was. Meals come from elsewhere, or get eaten elsewhere. The family scatters to its screens in its separate rooms. The gravity that once pulled everyone into that one warm room has weakened, and the kitchen, for all its granite and its islands, can sit quiet and unused. But in the 1970s, the kitchen was where a family truly lived, in the smell of supper and the light left on and the endless drifting in and out. It held the whole of the day and the whole of the family, and it did it in avocado green and harvest gold without ever asking to be noticed. It is worth remembering warmly that heart of the home before we move on into the evening. Let's go back to Saturday morning, early, before the grown-ups are up. The house is quiet and grey with dawn light, and you have padded downstairs in your pyjamas to claim the television for yourself. This is the one morning of the week that belongs entirely to the children. A few golden hours of cartoons, a bowl of sugary cereal balanced on your knees, the volume kept low so as not to wake anyone. Nobody rushes you. Nobody needs the set. For a little while, the whole living room is yours, and Saturday stretches out ahead of you, endless and unspoken for. You wake on your own on Saturday without being called, some inner clock pulling you up early despite the whole empty day ahead. The house is different at this hour, hushed and dim, the grown-ups still asleep behind their door, the rooms holding that particular grey light of dawn before anyone has stirred. You move through it quietly, in your pyjamas, feet bare on the cool floor, down the stairs one careful step at a time, into a house that is, for once, entirely yours. The television is the prize, and on Saturday morning it is yours without a fight. This is the one time all week the set belongs to the children, because the cartoons come on Saturday morning and only Saturday morning, a few precious hours of them, and everyone knows it. There is no news your father needs to see, no program the grown-ups have claimed. The dial is yours to turn, the picture yours to warm up, the whole living room yours to sprawl in, and the luxury of it is almost dizzying. You turn the set on low, the volume kept down so as not to wake the house and settle in close to it, cross-legged on the floor or curled in the corner of the couch. The picture blooms up out of the dark, and there they are, the cartoons, bright and loud and wonderful, the ones you waited all week for. There was no calling them up whenever you pleased, no watching them any hour of any day. They came on Saturday, and if you wanted them you rose early and claimed your spot, and the earning made them sweeter. And there was cereal, of course, the good kind, the sweet kind, the kind that came in the bright box with the cartoon character on it. Saturday morning was when you got away with it, poured yourself a bowl with nobody there to suggest something more sensible, and carried it carefully to the living room balanced on your knees in front of the screen. The milk went sweet and coloured at the bottom, and you drank it straight from the bowl when the cereal was gone, and it was in that moment a nearly perfect happiness. Nobody rushed you. That was the gift of it, maybe even more than the cartoons or the cereal. On a school morning everything was hurry, get up, get dressed, eat, go. But Saturday had no schedule in it at all. The hours stretched out slow and shapeless, and you could sit in front of the television for as long as the cartoons ran. in no hurry, expected nowhere. Time moved differently on a Saturday morning, thick and golden and endless, the way time only moves when you're young and the whole day is a gift. Slowly the house would wake around you. You would hear the pipes knock as the shower ran, the heavy tread of your father on the stairs, the smell of the coffee starting up in the kitchen. The grown-ups surfaced into the morning, and the house filled back up with its ordinary sounds, and your private kingdom of the living room began, gently, to end. But by then you had had your hours, the best hours, the ones that belonged to you and the children alone, and you gave up the television without much complaint, full of cereal and cartoons and Saturday. It is one of the small particular joys of childhood in that era, this early Saturday hush and the treasure of the one weekly morning. It came with the way things were, the single television, the cartoons that aired only then, the slow, unhurried weekend that had not yet been filled up with 100 scheduled things. A child had to wait all week for it, and rise early to claim it, and that waiting and rising made it precious. Children now can summon their cartoons any hour of any day, endless and instant, and there is a kindness in that, and also, perhaps, a loss. When a thing is always available, it stops being a treasure. The special Saturday, waited for and earned, dissolves into an ordinary Tuesday that is exactly like every other. Something about the rareness made the joy, and the rareness is mostly gone. But once Saturday morning belonged to the children, and it was golden. The grey dawn, the low volume, the sweet cereal, the endless slow hours before the house woke. It is worth remembering tenderly, that small weekly kingdom, before we let the morning fully break. It is Sunday now, and the good dishes are coming out. Sunday dinner was the anchor of the week, the meal that gathered not just the household, but the wider family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, a cousin or two crowded in with extra chairs borrowed from the kitchen. The food took all afternoon to make, and the smell of it filled the house long before anyone sat down. There was a leaf added to the table to make it longer, elbows bumping, second helpings pressed on everyone whether they wanted them or not. It was loud and warm and a little chaotic, and it happened faithfully, week after week. The cooking began early, hours before anyone would eat, because a Sunday dinner was not thrown together. It was built. Your mother, or your grandmother, or the two of them side by side started in the late morning, and by noon the kitchen was a place of steam and clatter and purpose. There was the roast in the oven, filling the whole house with its slow, heavy smell. There were the potatoes to peel, mounded in the sink. There were the things that only came out on Sunday, the recipes that took too long for a weeknight, the dishes that meant this was a day set apart. The smell of it reached everywhere, up the stairs and into every room, so that no matter where you were in the house, you knew what was coming and roughly when. It made your stomach ache pleasantly through the long morning. It pulled the family one by one toward the kitchen, drawn by the promise of it, hovering at the edges, sneaking a taste and getting a hand swatted away. The anticipation was half the pleasure, the whole slow build of a meal you could smell for hours before you were allowed to touch it. The table had to grow to hold everyone. This was part of the ritual too, the adding of the leaf, the extension of the everyday table into something longer, grander, capable of seating the whole gathered clan. Chairs were borrowed from the kitchen, carried in from other rooms, a mismatched assembly pulled up wherever they would fit. The good tablecloth came out. The good dishes, kept in the cabinet all week, were brought down and set at every place. The table transformed itself for the occasion, dressed up the way the whole day was dressed up, And then they came, the wider family filling the house with noise and warmth. The grandparents, arriving a little early, settling into the best chairs. The aunts and uncles coming through the door with a dish to add to the meal and news to add to the talk. The cousins scattering off to play the moment they arrived, thundering through the house, herded back when it was time to eat. The rooms filled up with people who belonged to you, 3 generations of them, and the ordinary quiet house became, for an afternoon, a crowded and joyful place. When at last it was time, everyone crowded in around the long table, more people than the room was ever meant to hold. Elbows bumped, chairs scraped. You sat closer to your cousins than you would have liked, wedged in, passing the dishes in a constant circling flow. Somebody said the blessing, heads bowed, a brief hush over the whole loud table, and then it broke and the meal began in earnest, the bowls and platters moving hand to hand, everyone reaching, everyone talking at once. The food came in abundance, and there was no such thing as enough. Second helpings were not offered so much as insisted upon, pressed on you whether you had room or not, your plate refilled by a grandmother who took thinness as a personal failing and would not rest until you had eaten more than you thought possible. You ate until you could not, and then you were handed the rolls again, and you took one anyway because refusing was not really allowed and because it was, after all, so good. And through it all, the talk, the loud, overlapping, cheerful talk of a big family together. The grown-ups traded news and old stories, the same stories they told every time, worn smooth and beloved from the telling. Someone argued good-naturedly about something that did not matter. Someone laughed too loud. The children had their own conversations down at their end, and strained to hear the grown-up ones and stored away the bits of family lore that fell to them across the table. It was chaos, warm and happy chaos, the sound of a family being a family. It happened week after week, and that was the wonder of it. This was not a holiday, not a special occasion marked on the calendar. It was Sunday, and Sunday came every 7 days, and every 7 days the family gathered like this, faithfully, whether there was news to share or not. The regularity was the whole point. You knew, always, that come Sunday there would be the long table and the crowded chairs and the pressed second helpings and the people who were yours. It was a fixed point in a changing world, and a child grew up steadied by it. We gather less now, and less often, spread out as we are across cities and states, our Sundays filled with 100 other things. The wider family comes together for the holidays, maybe, and the long table with the leaf added sits mostly folded away. There is nothing wrong with the lives that scattered us, and yet something has gone thin where the weekly gathering used to be. But once Sunday dinner drew the whole family in around one crowded, joyful table, week after faithful week. The all-day cooking, the good dishes, the pressed helpings, the overlapping talk. It is worth remembering warmly that great weekly gathering before we clear the table and move on. Let's return to the kitchen table, this time in the evening. The dishes are cleared, and now it is covered in school books and loose-leaf paper and pencils worn down to stubs. This is where homework happened, out in the open, at the heart of the house, not shut away behind a bedroom door. Your mother worked at the counter nearby, close enough to answer a question about long division or to check a page of spelling words. There were no screens to look anything up. There was a dictionary, an encyclopedia set on the shelf, and the patience of the adults within earshot. The table changed its purpose as the evening wore on. An hour ago it had held the supper, the plates and the passing bowls and the whole gathered family. Now it was wiped clean and pressed into new service, spread with the tools of school, the same surface that fed you now teaching you. the busy heart of the house shifting from one job to the next without ever emptying out. You cleared a space among the crumbs the cloth had missed and laid out your books, and the homework began. It happened in the open, and that was simply how it was done. Not shut away upstairs behind a closed bedroom door, not tucked into some private corner, but right there in the kitchen, at the centre of everything, where the light was good and the company was close. Your books competed for space with whatever else the table held, a cooling pie, your father's newspaper, a younger sibling's colouring. You worked amid the ordinary traffic of the house, and nobody thought a child needed silence and solitude to learn. A child learned right there in the middle of the family, and mostly it worked. Your mother was nearby, at the counter, at the sink, working through the after-supper clean-up or getting a start on tomorrow, close enough to help without hovering. When you hit a wall, a problem you could not crack, a word you could not spell, you did not have far to turn. You just asked, across the room, and she answered, or came over and leaned in and looked at the trouble with you. She checked your spelling words, tested you on them, quizzed you while she dried the dishes. The help was woven into the evening, offered over her shoulder, part of the ordinary rhythm of the room, and when the answer was not in your head or your mother's, there was no screen to summon it from the air. There was no instant look-up, no glowing rectangle that knew everything. There was the dictionary, heavy and worn, that you hauled down and paged through, learning 3 other words on your way to the one you wanted. There was the encyclopedia, that proud row of matching volumes on the shelf, the pride of the household, bought on some installment plan and consulted with a certain reverence. You looked things up the slow way, and the slowness taught you something too, the shape of the search itself. There is a particular memory in the feel of it, the pencil worn down to a stub, the eraser gone grey and useless, the loose leaf paper with its 3 punched holes, the long division that marched down the page, the columns that had to line up just so, the spelling words written out 10 times each in your careful, laborious hand. The book report agonized over. It was tedious, some of it, and hard, and you would rather have been anywhere else. But it was yours to do, and you did it, at the kitchen table, in the warm light, with the house going on around you. The house did go on around you, and that was part of it. Your father read his paper across the table, or listened to the radio low. A younger sibling played on the floor. The dishes clinked, the water ran, the evening sounds of a family filled the room while you bent over your work. It was not quiet, but it was a comfortable kind of noise, the noise of belonging, and you learned to work inside it, to concentrate amid the pleasant hum of the people you loved. The homework got done not in spite of the family, but in the midst of it. And being out in the open meant you could not hide from it either. Your mother could see whether you were working or dawdling. She knew when the homework was finished and when it was only claimed to be. There was an accountability in doing your work at the centre of the house, under the loose watch of the whole family, that a closed bedroom door would never have provided. The kitchen table kept you honest and kept you company, both at once. When it was finally done, the books were stacked and the papers gathered and the table wiped clean once more, ready to become itself again. The breakfast table, the coffee table, the table where tomorrow's supper would land. The homework disappeared back into the school bag by the door, and you had done it there, in the warm, bright centre of your home, with help and arm's reach away, and the family humming all around you. Children study differently now, often alone in their rooms, screens open, the whole of human knowledge a click away and the family a flaw removed. There is real power in that, The instant answer, the private focus. And yet something was good about the old way too, the homework done in the open, at the heart of the house, help close at hand and no hiding from the work. But once the kitchen table did double duty, feeding the family and teaching its children in the same warm light. The worn pencils, the heavy dictionary, the mother at the counter. It is worth remembering fondly that homework done in the heart of the home before the evening carries us onward. Now think about the mail. Before you could reach anyone, anywhere, in an instant, staying in touch meant sitting down and writing it out by hand. A letter to a grandmother 2 states away, a postcard from a summer trip, a birthday card that took days to arrive and was propped up on the mantel when it did. You walked to the mailbox at the end of the drive with a small flicker of hope, wondering if today was the day something came just for you. Waiting was part of it. The slow, sweet anticipation that made the arrival feel like a small gift. To reach someone far away, you had to sit down and do it by hand. There was no other way. You found the paper and the pen, and you settled in at the kitchen table or the little desk, and you wrote, forming each word, thinking as you went because there was no easy taking it back. A letter took time, real time, an hour of an afternoon given over to it, and that time was part of what you were sending. The care of it showed in the careful hand, the crossed-out word, the news set down thoughtfully because it might be weeks before you could add anything more. You wrote to the people distance had taken from you. A grandmother 2 states away who lived for the letters and answered everyone. A friend who had moved, a relative in another city, a son or daughter off in the service or away at school. The letter was the thread that held these people to you across the miles, and it was a slender thread, and you tended it. You told them the small news of your life, the things that had happened, the things you thought they would want to know, and you sealed it up and sent it off into the slow machinery of the mail. And there were postcards, the bright little rectangles from a summer trip, a scrawled few lines from somewhere far away. Wish you were here, and it meant it. A picture of the beach, the mountains, the roadside attraction, mailed home to the people who could not come, arriving days after the trip itself was over. The birthday cards, too, chosen at the drugstore, signed and sealed, and sent early because you had to allow for the days it would take, and when they came they were set up on the mantel, proof that someone far away had thought of you and taken the trouble. The mailbox stood at the end of the drive, and the walk out to it was a small daily ritual charged with hope. You went out to get the mail, and you never quite knew what you would find. Bills, mostly, and the newspaper, and the circulars nobody wanted. But sometimes, folded in among the ordinary, there was a letter addressed by hand, your name on it in a familiar script, and the whole day turned on the small thrill of it. Something had come, someone had written, the waiting had paid off, because you did wait, and the waiting was the whole texture of it. You could not know when the answer to your letter would come, only that it would take days, a week, more. And so you watched for it. You wondered, walking out to the box each afternoon, whether today was the day. The anticipation stretched out long and sweet, and it made the arrival, when it finally came, feel like a gift you had half earned by the wanting. There was no instant reply to flatten the waiting into nothing. The slowness was built in, and the slowness was part of the joy. And what came was a thing you could hold. This is what the screen has taken without our quite noticing. A letter was physical, real, the actual paper someone far away had touched, marked with their actual hand. You could keep it. You could read it again. You could tie a stack of them with a ribbon and put them in a drawer, and years later take them out and hold the very pages a loved one had written. The ink of them, the fold of them, a piece of that person preserved. The letters outlasted the moment. They became keepsakes, treasures, the archive of a family's love. There was weight to what you wrote too, knowing it would last, knowing it could not be unsent or quickly amended. You chose your words with more care than we choose them now, when a message costs nothing and vanishes as fast as it comes. A letter was deliberate. It asked you to slow down, to think, to say what you meant fully because you would not get another chance at it soon. And the person receiving it knew that care, felt it in every line, understood that you had given them your time as much as your news. We reach each other instantly now, endlessly, a message crossing the world in the time it takes to think it. There is wonder in that, and a real gift. The distance collapsed, the loved one always within reach, and yet the letters have mostly stopped, and with them the waiting, and the keeping, and the particular weight of words set down by hand to last. But once, staying in touch meant the slow, sweet labour of the letter, and the long, hopeful wait for the mail, the careful hand, the postcard from the trip, the card propped on the mantel, the walk to the box. It is worth remembering tenderly, that patient art of reaching one another before we send it on its way. Let's talk about boredom, which was not a problem back then so much as a doorway. On a long empty afternoon with nothing planned and nothing on the television, a child in the 1970s had to invent something out of nothing. A cardboard box became a fort, a stick became a sword. An hour got filled with a game whose rules you made up as you went. There was no screen to reach for, no endless feed to scroll. There was only your own imagination and the wide, unstructured hours, and somehow that was enough to build a whole world. The empty afternoon arrived often, and there was no quick cure for it. The chores were done or ignored. There was nothing on the television, and anyway there was only the one and someone else likely had it. No friend was around, or the friends were as bored as you. And so there you were, a child alone with the long stretch of unfilled hours and the flat grey feeling of not knowing what to do with yourself. Boredom, real boredom, the kind that presses down and makes the clock crawl. But that boredom was not the dead end it might seem. It was a doorway, though you did not know it, the necessary emptiness that imagination rushes in to fill, because there was nothing handed to you, nothing glowing that would entertain you at the touch of a button. You had to make the entertainment yourself, out of the ordinary stuff of the world around you, and you did. Left alone with your own restlessness long enough, you always did. A cardboard box was the beginning of everything. The big one, the new appliance came in, became a fort, a spaceship, a cave, a store, whatever the afternoon required. You cut a door in it. You crawled inside. You furnished it the things you dragged in, and you lived in it for hours in a world entirely of your own making. A stick from the yard became a sword, a rifle, a magic wand, a fishing pole. A blanket over 2 chairs became a tent. The whole material world was raw material, and a bored child was an inventor, turning nothing much into anything at all. The games you made had rules you invented as you went, elaborate and ever-shifting, argued over and amended in the playing. You made up whole worlds and moved through them alone, narrating under your breath, becoming in turn every character the story needed. You set yourself challenges, jump from here to there without touching the ground, throw the ball against the step 100 times without missing. You dug holes for no reason. You watched ants. You lay in the grass and found shapes in the clouds. And an hour passed, and you had made it out of nothing at all. There was no feed to scroll, no endless stream of someone else's cleverness to swallow the empty hour. The entertainment did not come from outside, packaged and polished and infinite. It came from inside you, summoned up by necessity, and that made all the difference. A screen fills the boredom for you and asks nothing of you in return. But the empty afternoon of a 1970s childhood asked everything of you, demanded that you supply the wonder yourself, and in the supplying, you built something that lasted. Because that was the hidden gift of all that boredom, the thing we only see clearly now that it is gone. The empty hours were where the imagination got its exercise. A child left to invent his own fun, again and again, day after unstructured day, was a child growing a muscle, the muscle of making something out of nothing, of turning a box into a castle and an afternoon into an adventure. That capacity did not come from being entertained. It came from being bored and having to answer the boredom yourself and learning that you could. It taught patience too, and a kind of resourcefulness and a comfort with your own company that is harder to come by now. You learned to be alone without being lonely, to sit inside an empty hour and trust that you could fill it. You learned that the world was full of possibility if you looked at it right, that the ordinary things around you were only waiting for your imagination to make them into something more. These were real lessons, and boredom was the teacher, patient and insistent. Now the empty hour never quite comes, or never has to. There is always the screen, always the feed, always the instant bottomless entertainment ready in the pocket, and the moment boredom threatens, we reach for it and make it disappear. There is comfort in that, and I understand the reaching. But the doorway has closed a little. The empty afternoon that once forced a child to invent a world now gets filled before it can do its quiet work. But once, boredom was a gift a child received almost daily, and answered with cardboard forts and stick swords and games made up on the spot. The wide unstructured hours, the imagination stretching to fill them, the whole world built out of nothing much. It is worth remembering fondly that slow and generative art of being bored before we scroll on past it. Step out into the driveway now on a Saturday afternoon. Your father is bent over the open hood of the car, sleeves rolled up, a rag hanging from his back pocket, and a transistor radio playing beside him. In the 1970s, a man was expected to know his own engine, to change the oil, swap a belt, coax a stubborn carburetor back to life. The driveway became a workshop, the smell of gasoline and warm metal hanging in the air. Maybe you were handed a wrench and told to hold this, right here, and for that moment you were part of it, learning by watching, by doing, by being close. It was a common Saturday sight, up and down the block, the hoods propped open, and the men bent into them. The cars pulled half out of the garages and given over to an afternoon of tending. This was simply part of owning a car then, the regular hands-on care of it, the oil changed and the plugs checked, and the small troubles fixed at home rather than handed off. A man kept his own car running, and Saturday was when he did it, and the driveways of the neighbourhood became, for an afternoon, a row of open-air garages. Your father had his method, his ritual. The sleeves rolled up out of the way, the old rag hanging from his back pocket, already grey with grease, the hood propped open, revealing the engine you found so mysterious, that dense metal tangle of parts he seemed to understand completely. He leaned in over it, or slid beneath the car on a flattened cardboard box, and went to work with a patience and a competence that impressed you without your quite knowing why. He knew what he was doing. That plain fact was a kind of magic to a watching child. The transistor radio played beside him through it all, propped on the fender or the workbench, tuned to the game or to music, keeping him company in the work. It gave the afternoon its sound, the low commentary or the songs mixing with the clink of the wrench and the occasional muttered word when a bolt would not turn. The radio was part of the ritual too, the small companion of a man working alone with his hands, and its sound is bound up now in memory, with the whole scene inseparable from it. And the smells. The driveway on a Saturday had a particular perfume, sharp and mechanical and somehow satisfying. The gasoline, of course, and the motor oil, dark and heavy. The warm metal of an engine that had been run and was cooling now under the open sky. The rubber, the exhaust, the grease that got on everything and would not wash out. It was not a pleasant smell exactly, and yet you came to love it, because it was the smell of your father at work, the smell of Saturday, the smell of a thing being fixed by someone who knew how. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you got to be part of it. Your father would call you over, hand you a wrench, tell you to hold this right here and not let it slip. And you held it with everything you had, desperate to do it right, to be useful, to be trusted with your small piece of the work. He showed you things, named the parts, explained in a few words what he was doing and why. You did not understand most of it, but you were there, close, inside the circle of his attention, and that was the whole of what you wanted. That was the real thing that happened in the driveway more than the oil changed or the belt replaced. Something passed between a father and a child out there, in the handing of the wrench and the holding of the part. It was time together, the particular kind of time that comes from working side by side at a task, not facing each other but facing the same thing, shoulder to shoulder over the engine. Men of that era were not always easy with words, not always given to sitting a child down and talking. But they could hand you a wrench. They could show you how a thing worked. And in that, without saying it, they told you they wanted you near. You learned by watching, by doing, by being close. The old way of learning that needs no lesson plan. You picked up the names of the tools and the feel of the work and the sense, absorbed over many Saturdays, of what it meant to take care of the things you owned, to fix rather than replace, to understand the machines that served you. Whether or not you ever fixed a car yourself, you carried something away from those afternoons, some idea of competence, of self-reliance, of a man's quiet pride in his own two hands. We do not tend our cars this way much anymore. They've grown too complex, sealed up and computerized, meant for the shop and not the driveway. We hand them off to be fixed by others, and the Saturday ritual has faded from the block. The hood's closed, the driveway's empty of bent-over men and watching children. There are good reasons for it, and still, something has gone quiet where that shared work used to be. But once, a father spent his Saturday afternoon bent over the open hood, and sometimes he called his child over and handed them a wrench. The rolled sleeves, the greasy rag, the radio playing, the smell of oil and warm metal. It is worth remembering warmly, that time together in the driveway, before we close the hood and move along. Let's talk about chores. In the 1970s, a child was not merely a resident of the house, but a contributor to it. There were beds to make, lawns to mow, dishes to dry, trash to haul to the curb, and at the end of the week, if the work was done, there might be an allowance, a few coins or a folded bill that felt enormous in your hand because you had earned it. The chores were not optional, and the money was not guaranteed. But there was something in that arrangement that made you feel useful, trusted, part of the working of the household. A child had a role in the running of the house, and everybody understood it. You were not a guest to be waited on. You lived there, and living there meant helping, meant taking on your share of the endless work a household requires. This was not a punishment, and not a special request. It was simply the arrangement, understood from the time you were old enough to carry a plate, that a family kept its house together, and that you, being part of the family, did your part. The chores were many and they were ordinary. There were the beds to be made each morning, pulled tight and smoothed before you left for school. There were the dishes after every meal, one washing and one drying, the towel passed back and forth, the plates stacked away. There was the trash to be gathered and hauled out to the curb on the right night, a job you did not love but did. There was the lawn to be mowed in summer, back and forth in the heat behind the push mower, the smell of cut grass and gasoline, a whole Saturday morning given to it. Leaves to rake in fall, snow to shovel in winter. The work turned with the seasons and never truly ended. And at the end of the week, if you had done what was asked, there was the allowance. This was the reward, the small wage of a working child handed over on the appointed day, a few coins or a folded bill that felt like a fortune in your palm. You closed your hand around it. It was yours, truly yours, in a way nothing else quite was, because you had earned it, done the work and collected the pay, and there was a pride in that no gift could match. That small sum meant more than its face because of everything behind it. But the money was not automatic, and that mattered. The allowance was tied to the work, and if the work was not done, the allowance did not come, or came reduced, or came with a word about doing better next week. This was the whole lesson of it, really. You did not get paid for existing. You got paid for contributing, and the pay depended on the contribution, and in that simple arrangement a child learned something true about how the world would later work. Effort and reward were joined. You saw the connection plainly week after week in the coins in your hand. There was a great deal packed into that small transaction. There was responsibility, the sense that something depended on you, that a job was yours to do and yours to answer for. There was the taste of independence that came with money you had earned, the freedom to save it or spend it as you chose, to want something and work toward it. There was the feeling, quieter but deeper, of being trusted, of being counted on, of being a real and necessary part of the household rather than a passenger in it. And there was the being part of it, which may have been the most important thing of all. When you dried the dishes beside your mother, when you hauled the trash out with your father, when you mowed the lawn while the family went about it Saturday, you were woven into the working of the home. You saw what it took to keep a household running, the endless small labours that a family performs to stay a family. You were not shielded from that work. You were enlisted in it, and the enlisting told you that you mattered, that your hands were needed, that the house was yours to keep as much as anyone's. It made you capable too in ways that lasted. You learned to do things, real things, the making of a bed and the washing of a dish and the mowing of a lawn, skills you would carry into your own life and your own home someday. You learned the discipline of a task that had to be done whether you felt like it or not. You learned that work was simply part of life, not a hardship to be avoided, but a normal daily thing, and that knowledge served you well when you grew up and the chores became your own. We ask less of children now, sometimes, uncertain whether we should burden them, quick to do the work ourselves, and there is love in that impulse, the wish to give a child an easy time. But something may be lost when nothing is required, when a child never learns the pride of earned money or the satisfaction of a job done, never feels themselves a needed part of the household's work. But once a child earned their keep with made beds and dried dishes and mowed lawns, and collected a hard-won allowance at the week's end. The work that was not optional, the money that was not guaranteed, the pride of being counted on. It is worth remembering fondly that small daily apprenticeship in being useful before we set it down and move on. It is Sunday morning again, and the good clothes are laid out on the bed. Much of family life in the 1970s moved to a weekly rhythm, and Sunday sat at the centre of it. Church in your Sunday best, then home again for the big meal, then a slow and quiet afternoon. The week had a shape you could feel, a set of small rituals that told you where you were in time. Getting dressed up was part of that shape, a way of marking the day as different, as set apart. It gave the week its bones, and it gave the family something to move through together. The clothes were laid out the night before, or first thing in the morning, and they were not the everyday clothes. They were the good ones, the Sunday ones, kept apart for this. The stiff shirt with the collar that itched, the dress with the sash your mother tied in a bow behind your back, the good shoes, polished the night before, that pinched a little because you only wore them once a week. Getting into them was its own small event, the whole family transforming from its weekday selves into something more formal, more careful, dressed for the occasion the day demanded. And there was an occasion. Sunday morning meant church. For a great many families, the whole household bundled into the car and driven to the same building they went to every week, filing into the same pew, greeting the same faces. Whatever a person made of the faith itself, the going was a fixed point, a thing the family did together every 7 days without fail. You sat still. You tried not to fidget in the itchy collar. You stood and sat with everyone else and mouthed the words, and waited for it to be over, and were in some way you could not name, shaped by the steady weekly rhythm of it. Then home again, and the transformation reversed, the good clothes carefully removed and hung back up, saved for next Sunday, the everyday clothes pulled on with relief. And the house filled with the smell of the big meal already underway, the Sunday dinner that anchored the afternoon. The morning's formality gave way to the warmth of the kitchen, the dressing up to the sitting down, one part of the ritual flowing into the next as it had every Sunday you could remember. And after the meal, the long slow quiet of a Sunday afternoon, unlike any other afternoon of the week. The stores were closed, most of them, so there was no going out to shop. The pace of everything dropped. The grown-ups grew drowsy after the big meal, your father dozing in his chair, the newspaper spread across his chest. The children were sent out to play or left to their own quiet devices. Time moved differently on a Sunday afternoon, thick and unhurried, a day set deliberately apart from the busy days around it, given over to rest whether you wanted it or not. The whole week had a shape you could feel, and Sunday gave it that shape. Each day had its character, its rituals, its place in the turning of the week. There was the Monday washing, the standing weekly errands, the particular suppers that came on particular nights, the Friday relief, and Sunday at the centre, the pivot the week turned on. You always knew, without checking a calendar, roughly where you were, because the days announced themselves through what you did in them, and the rhythm was steady and familiar and deeply reassuring. That rhythm gave the week its bones. A life needs a shape, a set of fixed points to hang the days on, or it dissolves into an undifferentiated blur, one day the same as the next, time slipping by unmarked. The weekly rituals were those fixed points. They divided the endless flow of days into knowable pieces. They gave you something to look forward to and something to move through, a structure that held the week upright, and a child growing up inside that structure felt the steady ground of it beneath them, and it gave the family something to move through together. The dressing up, the going to church, the coming home to the meal, the slow, shared afternoon, these were things the whole household did as one, week after week, the same faces in the same rituals. The rhythm was not private, it was collective, a thing the family kept together, and in the keeping of it they were bound a little closer, made a little more one thing, a household moving through time in step. The rhythm has loosened now for most of us. The stores stay open on Sundays and every day runs into the next. Fewer families dress up, fewer keep the weekly rituals that once divided the days. The week blurs. Sunday is a day like the others, filled with the same errands and screens and scattered activity, and the slow set-apart afternoon has mostly gone. There is freedom in that looseness, and also, perhaps, a loss of shape. But once, the week had a felt rhythm, and Sunday sat at the heart of it. The good clothes and the church and the big meal and the slow bright afternoon. The bones of the week, the fixed points, the ritual the family kept together. It is worth remembering warmly that steady weekly shape before the days blur on. Let's go to the backyard on a warm evening. The grill is smoking, your father standing over it with a long fork and a can of something cold. The screen door keeps slapping as people carry out bowls of potato salad and stacks of paper plates. Lawn chairs get dragged into a loose circle. The kids run barefoot through the grass while the grown-ups talk into the long golden dusk, in no hurry to go inside. There is corn on the cob and watermelon and the smell of charcoal drifting over the fence. Summer evenings like this seem to stretch on forever, and no one wanted them to end. The grill was the centre of it, and your father was the keeper of the grill. This was his domain, uncontested, the one cooking a man of that era took as his own. He stood over it with the long fork and the tongs, tending the coals, flipping the burgers and the hot dogs and the chicken, a can of something cold sweating in his other hand. The smoke rose off it in a fragrant cloud. He guarded it with a seriousness that was almost comic, offering opinions on the fire, waving off anyone who came too close, wholly in his element out there in the yard. Behind him the screen door kept up its steady rhythm, slapping open and slapping shut as the food came out from the kitchen. The bowls of potato salad and coleslaw, the stack of paper plates weighed down against the breeze, the condiments, the buns, the pitcher of lemonade or tea. Everyone carried something out back and forth across the threshold, and the door announced each trip with its bang, that particular summer sound. The sound of a house that had spilled its dinner out into the yard. The lawn chairs came out too, the aluminum-framed ones with the woven plastic webbing, dragged from the garage and arranged in a loose and shifting circle on the grass. The grown-ups settled into them as the food cooked, drinks in hand, easing into the long, unhurried evening. There was no rush to any of it. Nobody was watching a clock. The whole point of an evening like this was its slowness, its lack of any schedule, the way it invited everyone to sit down and stay a while, and the children ran wild through it all, barefoot in the cooling grass, freed from shoes and from supervision both. They played the endless games of a summer evening, tag and catch and whatever else, weaving between the lawn chairs, chased by nobody, called back only when the food was ready. The grass grew cool and a little damp as the sun went down. The fireflies began to rise. The kids ran until they were breathless and then flopped down and then ran some more, wringing every last drop out of the daylight and the dusk that followed it. The food, when it came, was the plain glorious food of summer. The burgers and dogs hot off the grill, a little charred at the edges, the corn on the cob dripping butter, eaten off the cob in messy rows, the watermelon cut into great red wedges, the juice running down your chin and your arms, the seeds spat out into the grass. It was not fancy food, and it was not meant to be. It was food for eating outside, with your hands in the warm evening air, and it tasted better out there than anything ever tasted at the table. And over all of it hung the smell of the charcoal, drifting up from the grill and out across the yard and over the fence into the neighbours' yards, where, likely as not, another grill was smoking and another family was doing the very same thing. That smell was summer itself, distilled. The smell that meant warm evenings and gathered people and nowhere to be. It carried through the whole neighbourhood on those nights, house to house, a shared perfume rising over the whole block as the day cooled and the families came outside. The grown-ups talked into the dusk, in no hurry to go in. This was the heart of it, really, beneath the food and the games. The long, unhurried talk of adults with a whole summer evening to spend, sitting in the lawn chairs as the light went golden and then dim, the conversation wandering wherever it pleased. They talked about everything and nothing, the neighbours and the news and the old stories, their voices low and easy in the gathering dark. The children caught fireflies at the edge of it. The evening stretched and stretched, and the evenings did seem to stretch forever, in the way that summer evenings do when you are young, and the days are long and school is a distant rumour. The light hung on and on. The dusk lasted an hour. Nobody wanted it to end, and so nobody ended it, and the family stayed out there in the yard until the last of the light was truly gone, and the mosquitoes finally drove them in. Even then you went reluctantly, carrying the chairs and the empty bowls back across the slapping threshold, wishing the evening could have lasted a little longer still. We gather in the yard less now, some of us, our evenings pulled indoors to the screens and the air conditioning, the grills cold, the lawn chairs folded in the garage. There are reasons, and I understand them. But something warm has gone quiet where those long summer evenings used to be. But once, a family carried its whole dinner out into the backyard on a warm evening and stayed there until dark. The smoking grill, the slapping door, the barefoot kids, the golden endless dusk. It is worth remembering fondly that long, slow summer evening before the light finally goes. Now the sun is down, and the family gathers around the table again, but this time for a game. Out come the cards, or the board with its little tokens and paper money, or the dominoes clacking in their box. There was no better entertainment on a weeknight than this. The whole family bent over the same table, laughing, bluffing, arguing good-naturedly over the rules. The television was off. The phone did not ring. There was just the small drama of the game and the faces you knew best, lit warm under the kitchen light. The table did its final duty of the day. It had held the breakfast and the homework and the supper, and now, the dishes cleared and the evening settling in, it became the place where the family gathered to play. Somebody suggested it, or it was simply understood, and the chairs were pulled in once more, and out came the games from the closet or the drawer where they lived. The same table that had organised the whole day now organised the evening's fun, the family drawn back to it one more time before bed. The games themselves came out of their worn boxes, familiar as old friends. The deck of cards, soft at the edges from years of shuffling, dealt around the table with a practised flick. The board game with its folding board gone soft at the crease, its little tokens and its paper money and its cards you drew and read aloud. The dominoes, clacking together in their box, spilled out on the table and turned face down and shuffled with a satisfying rattle. These were the household's games. Played so many times, the rules were second nature, and taking them out was like greeting something beloved. There was a whole warm evening's entertainment in them, better than anything the one television could offer on an ordinary weeknight. The family bent over the same board, the same hand of cards, drawn into the small shared world of the game. There was strategy and luck, and the little dramas of winning and losing. There was the bluffing at cards, the poker face attempted and failed, the triumphant reveal. There was the slow accumulation of points, the comebacks, the sudden reversals that turned the whole thing on its head. Simple stuff and endlessly absorbing because you were playing it together. The laughter was the best of it. A game night was a loud night, full of the particular laughter of a family at ease, teasing and groaning and crowing over their luck. Somebody made a terrible play and everybody laughed. Somebody won at the last second and leapt up in triumph. The little brother cheated, badly and obviously, and got caught, and it became the joke of the evening. The laughter rolled around the table, easy and unforced, the sound of people who loved each other having a plain good time. And the arguing, the good-natured arguing over the rules, was half the fun too. Every family played by its own house rules, half remembered and fiercely defended, and every game brought some dispute about how a thing was really done. Voices rose, cases were made, the rule-book was consulted or ignored, and a compromise reached, and the game went on. Nobody really minded. The arguing was part of the ritual, a family bickering happily over dominoes, the disagreements as much a part of the tradition as the game itself. The television was off, and the phone did not ring, and that absence was the whole point. On a game night, the family turned away from the one screen it had and toward each other, gathered around the table with nothing pulling their attention elsewhere. There was no glowing rectangle in the corner competing for their eyes, no device in every hand drawing each person off into their own separate world. There was just the game and the table and the faces, everyone present, everyone in it together, the evening undivided. It was the presence that made it, the simple fact of the whole family in one place, attending to one thing, together. The kitchen light hung warm over the table. The faces around it were the faces you knew best in all the world, lit soft and close, bent over the cards and the board. You saw them plainly on a night like that, your family, unguarded and laughing and wholly there, and you were wholly there too, and the ordinary evening became something you would carry with you for the rest of your life without ever meaning to. We are pulled apart more easily now, even in the same room, each of us with a screen and a separate stream of things to look at. The board games sit in the closet longer between playings. The family gathers, but not always around one table, not always turned toward one another with nothing else calling. There's so much to distract us now, and the undivided evening has grown rare. But once the family cleared the table after dark and gathered around it for a game, laughing and bluffing and arguing over the rules by the warm kitchen light. The worn cards, the soft old board, the clacking dominoes, the faces you knew best. It is worth remembering warmly that undivided evening together before we put the game away. Let's turn to the record player in the corner of the living room. Music in the 1970s was something you held in your hands. A record slipped carefully from its sleeve, set spinning on the turntable, the needle lowered with a gentle crackle. You listened to whole albums, front to back, the way they were meant to be heard. Your father had his favourites, your older sister had hers, and the sound of the house shifted depending on who got to the player first. It filled the rooms and seeped down the hall, the soundtrack of ordinary evenings at home. The record player sat in its own place of honour, a piece of furniture as much as a machine, the console model with its lid that lifted or the components stacked on a shelf, with the speakers set out to either side. It was a thing of some pride in the household, cared for and understood, and playing a record on it was a small ceremony, with its own careful steps, learned young and performed with respect. Because the music was a physical thing then. held in your two hands. You went to the shelf where the records stood in their tall square sleeves and you chose one, sliding it out, studying the cover, that big, beautiful square of art you could hold and read and pore over. Then you drew the record itself from the sleeve, careful, touching only the edges the way you'd been taught, mindful of the black grooved surface that held the music somehow in its spiraling lines. You set it on the turntable. You lowered the needle to the edge with a held breath, and there came that gentle crackle and hiss before the music began, the sound of the needle finding its way, the small sound that meant a song was coming. And then you listened to the whole thing. This is the part that has slipped away most completely. You played the album front to back, all the way through, side one, and then the ritual of flipping it over and side two, in the order the music was meant to be heard. You did not skip around. You did not pluck out the one song you wanted and discard the rest. You took the album as it came, the whole of it, and you learned it that way, every track in its place, the quiet ones and the loud ones, the way one song led into the next. An album was a journey with a shape, and you travelled the whole of it. The house had its music, and the music depended on who reached the player first. Your father had his records, the ones he had loved for years, and when he put one on, the house took on his particular mood, the songs of his younger days filling the rooms. Your older sister had hers, newer, and when she got there first, the house filled with something else entirely, the sound of her generation, played loud when the grown-ups were out. The record player was a small contested territory, and whoever held it set the sound of the whole house for a while, so that the music told you, without your looking, who was home and who had won the turntable that evening. And the sound filled the house in a way that was different from music now. It came from the one player, in the one room, and spread outward from there, into the living room where it played, and then down the hall and into the other rooms, growing fainter as it went. You heard it everywhere, softened by distance, the music of whoever was playing it seeping under doors and around corners, the whole house scored by a single record. It was shared, unavoidable, a sound the family lived inside together rather than each person sealing themselves off with their own. It became the soundtrack of ordinary evenings, this music that filled the shared air. You did homework to it, drifting down the hall. You heard it while you played on the floor, while supper was made, while the evening wore on toward bed. Certain records became bound up with certain seasons, certain years, certain feelings, so that hearing them now, decades on, throws you back instantly to the living room and the light and the people who were there. The music was woven into the life of the house, and the life of the house into the music, inseparable in memory. There was a care in it too that shaped how you felt about the music. The records could scratch, could warp, could be ruined by careless hands, and so you handled them gently, kept them in their sleeves, cleaned the dust from them, treated them as the treasures they were. That care made the music feel valuable in a way the endless free stream of it now cannot quite match. You owned these albums, a finite and beloved collection, each one chosen and paid for and played until you knew it by heart. They were yours, and you tended them. Now, the music is everywhere and weightless, every song ever recorded available in an instant, played through small buds pressed into separate ears. This is wonder in that. The whole of recorded sound in your pocket, and I would not give it back. But the music no longer fills the shared house the way it did. We listen alone now, mostly, each in our own private stream, and the album played front to back has given way to the endless shuffle. But once, music was a record held carefully in your hands and played whole through the one player in the corner, filling the rooms and seeping down the hall. The gentle crackle, the flipped side, the contested turntable, the soundtrack of ordinary evenings. It is worth remembering fondly that shared sound of the house before we lower the needle for the last time. Let's talk gently about manners. In the 1970s, a child learned early that certain things were simply expected. You said please and thank you. You did not speak back to your elders. You waited to be excused from the table, and a single look from your mother across a crowded room could stop you cold. No words required. Discipline then was a quieter, steadier thing, woven into the everyday, understood without being explained. It could feel strict, and sometimes it was, but it also gave a child a clear sense of the lines and a strange comfort in knowing exactly where they stood. The manners were taught early and expected always, drilled in so young they became almost instinct. Please and thank you, said without prompting, or said again more pointedly when you forgot. Yes, ma'am, and no, sir, in many households, a formality that put a certain respectful distance between a child and the grown-up world. You held the door. You gave up your seat. You greeted the adults who came to the house and answered when they spoke to you. These were not grand lessons in ethics. They were the small daily courtesies, the manners of a person living among others, and a child was expected to have them. There were rules at the table especially, a whole code of them. You did not begin until everyone was served, and the blessing, if there was one, was said. You kept your elbows off the table and your napkin in your lap. You ate what was put before you, or you tried. And you did not leave the table until you were excused, sitting there sometimes long after you'd finished, waiting for the word that released you, learning the patience and the deference that the waiting taught. The table was a schoolroom for manners, and supper was the daily lesson. And you did not speak back to your elders. This was among the firmest lines of all. A child did not argue with a grown-up, did not sass, did not offer up the smart reply that rose so easily to the lips. The adults held an authority that was simply not questioned, and a child who forgot it was reminded swiftly. It could be stifling, this rule, and it did not always serve a child well, silencing questions that deserved asking. But it was the world as it was, and you learned its shape early, and mostly you kept inside the lines it drew. The discipline that enforced all this was a quieter, steadier thing than we might expect. It did not depend on constant lectures or long negotiations. It was woven into the everyday, a settled fact of the household, understood without needing much explanation. The rules were the rules. Everyone knew them, and the enforcement, when it came, was often nothing more than a word, a tone, a change in the temperature of the room, the parent's authority so established that it rarely had to raise its voice to be obeyed. And at the heart of it all was the look. Every child of that era knew the look, the particular expression a mother or father could level across a crowded room that stopped you cold in whatever you were doing. It needed no words. It carried everything, the warning, the displeasure, the certain knowledge of consequences to come, all delivered silently in a single glance that found you wherever you were. You could be misbehaving at a gathering, sure you were unobserved, and then you caught your mother's eye across the room, and that was the end of it. You straightened up. You knew. The look was a language, and you were fluent in it. There was a strictness to all of this that we rightly look at more carefully now. The lines were sometimes drawn too hard. The silence demanded of children could shade into a real silencing, and the discipline could tip, in some homes, into something colder or harsher than a child should bear. It is not for me to paint it all in gold. The old ways had their failures, and some of what we have softened, we softened for good reason, having seen the cost. and yet there was something in it that served a child too, something worth naming even as we weigh the rest. The clear lines gave a child a kind of security. You knew exactly what was expected, exactly where the boundaries lay, and there was a comfort in that knowing, a solid ground beneath your feet. You were not left to guess, not set adrift to negotiate every rule anew. The world had a shape and you knew it, and knowing it paradoxically made you freer, because you could move with confidence inside the lines you understood. It gave you too a certain respect for others that the manners trained into your bones, the habit of courtesy, the awareness of the people around you, the small daily kindnesses of please and thank you, and holding the door. Those habits, drilled in young, stayed with you for life and served you and everyone you met. We raise children more gently now, more openly, with more words and fewer looks, and much of that is a real gain. But once, a child learned the manners early and knew the lines exactly, and a single glance across the room could say everything. The please and thank you, the waiting to be excused, the quiet, steady authority, the language of the look. It is worth remembering thoughtfully, both its comfort and its cost, before we move gently on. And so we come to the end of the day, and the end of our little journey back. We have walked through the whole of it together, the shared morning in the warm kitchen, the single television glowing in the corner, the supper at 5 o'clock with everyone in their chairs. We heard the screen door slap and the streetlights hum. We rode along on the aimless Sunday drive, sat around the game after dark, drifted off to a record playing down the hall. An ordinary day, in an ordinary house, in 1970s America. Nothing grand, just a life being lived, and that is the thing worth honouring tonight. The people who lived this era did not think of themselves as special. They were just getting through the week, making the meals, doing the chores, folding their families together night after night with a care so steady they never named it. They earned their keep and kept their promises and watched out for the children on the block. There was a quiet dignity in all of it, the dignity of ordinary people holding an ordinary life together, faithfully, without applause. Maybe you carry something small from them into your own life. Maybe you eat one supper this week with the screens put away. Maybe you let an afternoon go unplanned. Maybe you simply slow down just for a moment and notice the people right in front of you, the way they once did without trying. Because history is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a porch light and a shared table and someone who knows your name. And that is enough. That has always been enough. So pull the blanket up now and let your breathing settle and let the day go soft around you. You are safe and you are home, and there is nothing left to do tonight but rest. Sleep well. We will be here again soon.